What about the Quran? Here we get into the really gritty stuff, because now we get to the Quran. What are we going to do with this Quran? We've got the man, we've got the place, yet every prophet has a revelation. Where was Muhammad's revelation? If he is chosen as the prophet, he's got to have a revelation. But he's been dead for 60 years. So you got a problem here. So what do you do? Well, what do the Islamic traditions tell us? They say this is superior to all of the revelations. And I always ask the Muslims 4 questions whenever I talk about the revelation. You can ask the same 4 questions. Is this Quran eternal? Every Muslim will have to say yes. Am I correct on that? Is this Quran sent down? Was it sent down to a man named Muhammad between 610 and 632, that 22-year period? They all have to say yes. I don't know of any Muslim, whether they radical, nominal, or liberal, possibly not the liberals, that would not say yes to that. Was it complete at the time of Uthman, 20 years after Muhammad's death? He's the one that actually compiled it in its final form, the one that we use today. They have to say yes. And is it unchanged? In other words, the Quran we have in our hand today, is it the same Quran that was revealed to Muhammad, that was codified at the time of Uthman, that exists in that eternal tablet in heaven? Every Muslim will say yes to those 4. Can you remember those 4 words? Eternal, sent down, complete, unchanged. That's all you have to remember. I did this in a debate with Dr. Shabir Ali back in 2014, where we asked this very question. They're in Toronto, and I just asked those 4 simple questions. And he said yes, yes, yes, yes to all of them. So all I needed to ask was a 5th question. Prove it. Prove it. Now, you can't prove eternality. I don't expect him to prove that. You can't prove down whether it was sent to Muhammad, because we don't know anything about Muhammad or anything came from that time. I'm just asking him to prove the last 2, number 3 and 4. I want you to show me one manuscript of the Quran from the time of Uthman that is complete and unchanged. That's all we're asking. That's pretty simple enough, isn't it? Since they are the ones that claim it, we don't claim it. We would never claim that about our Bible. Our Bible is not eternal. Please don't say that. Sent down? No, it was not sent down. Inspired? Yes, but not sent down. Complete? Yes, we would agree with that. When in its original form it was complete. Unchanged? No, it has been changed. We know where the changes are. We even warn the readers where the changes are. So we would never make those 4 claims. We would only make one of them. Okay? So this is not our problem. This is their problem. See how easy it makes? I'm making it? You ask them these questions. Put them on the hot seat and ask them to show you one manuscript that is complete and unchanged from the mid-7th century, 652. Prove it. Now, they do believe that 6 manuscripts do exist today. They would say the 6 major ones, and this is Al-Bukhari. This is where it goes into that whole reference about how it was put together. It's in volume 6, hadith number 509 and hadith number 510. And it says very clearly that Uthman gave Zayd ibn Thabit along with Al-Zubair and Al-Harith, the 4 of them, were to rewrite the Quran in 650 at the time of Uthman. And then once they had rewritten the Quran, they were to send it out to every province. Now, how many provinces were there at that time? There were 9 provinces. Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo, Alexandria, Aden, Nishapur, and Herat. Those are the 9 provinces that existed at the time of Uthman. So they sent 9 copies to 9 cities in the mid-7th century. And then what does it say? And all the other fragmentary copies, they were burnt. They burned everything else. Why do you burn manuscripts? Because they disagreed. That's hard enough anyways. But nonetheless, we're not going to stick with that. Let's continue and let's ask about these 9 copies. The ones sent to Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo, Alexandria, Aden, Herat, and Nishapur. We're talking only about 1,400 years ago. Listen, if you want to see how much we have for our New Testament account, just come down to the British Library and I'll show you the entire 27 books of the New Testament called the Sinaiticus that has been around since the 4th century. That's 300 years before what we're talking now. Right next to it is the Alexandrinus. That's from the 5th century. That's 200 years from what we're talking now. If we can come up with 265 either partial or complete manuscripts of our New Testament but before the 6th century, certainly the Muslims can come up with one. One. That's all we're asking. We just want one of the 9. And see, they claim that they do exist. The 9 that they claim exist are these ones here. The Topkapi, which is in the Topkapi Museum there in Istanbul, in Turkey. The Samarkand, which is in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. The Mai'il, which is in the British Library there in London. So we know that one quite well. The Hosseini manuscript, which is in Cairo, there in Egypt. The Petropolitanus, which is in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, there in France. And then the most exciting, the Sana manuscript, which is just discovered in 1975 in Sana, there in Yemen. Those are the 6 major manuscripts. The problem is, except for the Petropolitanus and the Ma'il manuscript, we have not had access to any of these manuscripts. We can't touch them. We can't do any forensic testing on them. We would love to have done so. For 30 years, we've been asking to try to get close to these manuscripts, and we could not. But that changed in 2002. 2 Turkish scholars, Dr. Ekmel'in İnsalıoğlu and Dr. Tahir Atakuluç, finally were given access for 5 years. And from 2002 to 2007, they were able to look at these 6 manuscripts and come up to their conclusions. Now, their conclusions are written right here. We have their entire book. It's 1,000 pages long. This is just the introduction. It's all in English, so you can all read it. All you need to do is read this 83 pages and weep, because this destroys everything we have heard about the Quran. Now remember, these are the 2 leading authorities in the Muslim world on the Islamic Quranic manuscript. They own the top copy. They are the ones that have the best work. They're the only ones that have had access to all 6 manuscripts for 5 years. And this is their conclusion. Let's go through what they're saying.
And they're Muslims themselves.
They're Muslims themselves. They're from Turkey. What kind of Muslims? I don't know. I'm not going to say they're radical or nominal liberal, but they are scholars of the first degree. And that's why Muslims have to take them seriously, because they're their own kind. Now, Dr. Ekmel'in İnsalıoğlu says we have no Uthmanic Musafs. There is no Musaf. Musaf means manuscript. There is no codex from the time of Uthman. Not at all. Nor do we have any copies of these Musafs. These Musafs date from a later Umayyad period. The Umayyad period goes from 661 up until 749. The later Umayyad period means they're all 8th century manuscripts. Every one of them, except for one. Dr. Tahir Atakuluç is the greater scholar of the 2. He says there has been no seriously scholarly work has been done on them until they did their work. These Musafs date from the early to mid-8th century. They are not Uthmanic, nor are they copies sent by them. He looked at the top copy, and he dated the top copy, which is the best, the most complete of all the manuscripts that exist today. He dated it to the mid-8th century. That's 100 years after Uthman. That it only contains, though it includes 99% of the Quran, so much of it is damaged, only 78% of it can be read. And of the 78% that can be read, there are 2,270 manuscript variants. Manuscript variants. That means words or phrases that are different in that manuscript than the Quran we have today. Now, why haven't we been told this? Why has it taken 1,400 years for them to tell us this? The Samarkand manuscript is from the early 8th century. It's earlier than the top copy, they say, but it only goes up to Surah 43. There's 114 surahs. More than that, they said it is full of grammatical errors. It has scribal, copyist errors. It uses poor Arabic. In fact, they said it's an embarrassment because it's such a hopeless text. Obviously, whoever wrote it did not know Arabic very well. The Ma'il, which is in the British Library, we've already known about it. It only goes up to Surah 43. It is from the early 8th century. And it has many variants. We've always known this about that, and that's why we knew what they were going to find. The Hosseini manuscript is much too late. It's what they call a monumental text. It is dated by Tahir Atakuluç to the mid-8th century. Dr. François Doroche dates it to the 9th century because of the size of the text. It has variants. The Petropolitanus manuscript, which Dr. François Doroche owns and controls there in Paris, it is an early 8th century manuscript, but it is only 26% of the Quran. It is not complete. And in that 26%, it has 93 variants from the Quran that we have today. The Sana manuscript is the most exciting. This was discovered in 1975. In 1981, 3 German scholars, Gerd Pwin, von Bothmer, and Oleg, were flown down to then look at it because they were the only ones that could read it. Because it has no diacritical marks and has no vowelizations, no dots above and below the line. And as they then took pictures of it, they realized that they're holding a very archaic text. Because they noticed that on this side over here, they had a script that dated to 705. There's Surah 19, and that yellow mark, it jumps to Surah 22. What happened to Surah 20 and 21? Well, Surah 20 begins over on this side of the page in a completely different script. There's about 60 to 70 years between these 2 pages. Which means you see an evolution in the manuscript, this manuscript right here. Now, I went to see them. I went to see Gerd Pwin in Germany in 1999, and I took a picture of a facsimile. This is not the manuscript itself. This is just a photo of it. And he showed me all these orange marks. Every time you see an orange mark, that is a manuscript variant. That means a word that is different in that text from the Quran we have today. There's over 1,000 of these manuscript variants in just this text. When they looked at under ultraviolet light, they noticed that there's a script underneath. Do you see the script there? Very faint. These are all written on parchment, on vellum. This means animal skin, which you can wash off and rewrite over top, and wash off and rewrite over top. As they looked at it, they wanted to separate the two texts. And guess what they found? The lower text is 7th century, probably the last 2 decades of the 7th century. The upper text and the lower text don't agree. Ooh, I love that. Which means between the end of the 7th century and the early 8th century, the Quran was already changing. Now, Dr. Gerd Puyn's wife, Elizabeth Puyn, has just now come out of a book. She is now looking at all the differences. We're waiting for it to be published in English. It's already published in German. You can read it and tell us what she says. Because she is now exposing this palimpsest and showing that we have a completely different Quran underneath from what we have on top. Now, let's get to corrections, and here's where it really gets juicy. This is what I introduced back in 2014 to Dr. Shabir Ali. I said, Shabir Ali, have you looked and seen the corrections? He said, there are no corrections. I said, yes, there are. Dr. Dan Brubaker did his doctoral thesis looking at corrections. That's all he wanted to look at, was to see if there are any manuscript variants, just 1 or 2, possibly 15 was what he was hoping to find. He looked at 6 of these 6 manuscripts that we've looked at, plus 4 others that come later. So he looked at 10 manuscripts just to look for corrections. Guess what he found? Hundreds upon hundreds of insertions, words that are put above the line. Above the line. See these words that are added at a later date. He found hundreds of erasers where they just erase words. Why would they erase them? Of course, because they're changing the text. He found these erasers that were all written. There they erased an entire line, and then they wrote, in fact, 2 lines, and they wrote over top of it. Here you can see a word that has now been written over top of a completely different word. Sometimes it's written within a completely different color. Then he found these overwritings without erasers. They didn't even bother to erase it. They just wrote over top, so we can read both the lower and the upper text. He found tapings, which he thought were because of damage, but when he looked on the backside, there was no damage, so obviously they're trying to hide something there. Look at the tapings. There's a taping, there's a taping, there's a taping, there's a taping. Look at all these tapings. Wouldn't you love to know what's underneath that tape to see what they're trying to hide? And then he found these coverings, these selective coverings. There's a covering, there's a covering, there's a covering, there's a covering. Look at that. It's so many coverings, you can't even understand what's being said. Obviously, they're trying to change the text. Sometimes they had coverings with just 1 or 2 letters written over top, like the cuff here. Here's a covering with another word that's written over top. There's a covering with new words written over top. He found, by the time he finished his doctorate in 2014, 800 of these corrections. Not just 15, 800. And in every case, every one of the corrections was consonantal, which means it changes the whole meaning of the word. These were not vowelizations. These were not dog or aleph like Muslims try to say today. He purposely did not include any dog or alephs in them. These had nothing to do with vowelization because there were no vowels there. This vowelization was only introduced in the 9th century and the 10th century, which means that in every case they were changing the meaning of the text. And what was most disturbing was that these corrections continued up until the 9th century. For 200 years they were correcting it. 200 years after Uthman, standardizing the text. Western scholars now are concluding that the earliest Muslims begin to appear in the 8th century. Muslim scholars like Ekmeleddin and Altakulic now conclude that the earliest Muslims begin to appear in the 8th century. Even Islamic Awareness, the most prodigious, the largest website on manuscript, Islamic Quranic manuscript, has now finally admitted, because of the work of these 2 Muslim scholars, that the earliest manuscripts do not appear until the late 7th and early 8th century. The latest research shows that even these Muslims have 7 forms of correction dating up until the 9th century. Therefore, since the Muslims cannot prove that there are any complete manuscripts from the time of Uthman, I would suggest that the Quran is not eternal. I would suggest that it was not sent down. It was not complete in 650. It was not the same. It has been changed. Therefore, who is Muhammad and what was his purpose?